Hey everybody, my name is James Maples. I'm a sociology professor at Eastern Kentucky University. On behalf of my co-author and colleague, Michael Bradley, I am very excited to share with you today the results of our 2020 study on the economic impact of rock climbing right here in Kentucky's Red River Gorge. Now, as many of you may know, in 2015 we did a similar study, and I'm very excited to share these new results to update that study in 2020 to capture some of the really great things that have happened in the Red River Gorge in the last 5 years. We'll do a couple of things today. We're going to briefly explain what an economic impact study is, why that's important to the Red River Gorge's economy. We're going to briefly summarize what we know about the economic impact of rock climbing across the United States. It actually turns out we know quite a bit. We're also going to learn about the specific expenditures for climbers in the Red River Gorge. We'll also explore how those expenditures eventually turn into things like wages and jobs right here in this region. We'll also assess the expenditures of local rock climbers who also live in the Red River Gorge. These are people who are generally not included in economic impact studies, but we still want to capture those expenditures to learn more about that community. We are going to talk about the demographics of climbers in the Red River Gorge, and we're also going to compare these results to the 2015 study to try and understand some of the differences that have happened in the last 5 years. All right, we got a lot to do today, so let's get started. First things first, let's talk about what an economic impact study is. An economic impact study is studying the expenditures created by a particular group or an activity in a specific study area and trying to understand how those expenditures create changes in that study area over time. Now, economic impact studies are limited to new expenditures. So in the case of a visitor study, like this climbing study, they're thinking about people coming into an area to visit it, spend money, and then to go home, and who also basically live outside of this immediate area. To understand what we mean by live outside this area, we got to define a study area. We'll come back to that a little later. In fact, we're also going to need a couple of other things to do our economic impact study beyond our study area. We're also going to need to establish some mean expenditures for climbers in the red, and we're also going to need to establish some visitation estimates while we're at it. So that's a tall order, but we'll get through. Now, we do know a lot about economic impact and outdoor recreation. A great starting point is always Outdoor Industry Association's 2017 study, which showed outdoor recreation users spent $887 billion with a B dollars in the United States. Climbers were in there too. In fact, Outdoor Industry Association noted that they represented $12.4 billion of that figure. That's great, but the problem with these really large national studies is that it's really hard to bring that down to the local level. What do we do with that in the Red River Gorge, in Lander, Wyoming, in Bishop, California, in the New River Gorge in West Virginia? What do we do with those statistics? They're useful, but we don't understand the local area. That's why we actually need these smaller local studies of climbing communities so we have a clear understanding of their mean expenditures. We actually know quite a bit about that climbing community. In fact, there's been quite a few studies done in the last couple of years. Of course, we completed our 2015 study in 2016, and then we found the Red River Gorge climbing community spent $3.8 million a year in some of the poorest counties in the United States. $3.8 million, keep that number in mind. We'll come back to that. That study actually was followed up by studies in Chattanooga, Tennessee, Nantahala-Pisgah National Forest in North Carolina, in Custer Gallatin in Montana, and the G-Mug in Colorado. Even the New River Gorge in West Virginia, our new national park. All these different places, we have found that climbers are spending lots of different amounts, but they're spending lots of money in these communities. And the newest one is in Bishop, California, a study that released just a few months back where we found that climbers were spending $13.9 million a year right there in the high desert. We also have studies coming up in the Lander, Wyoming area and also in Utah. So we know a lot about the economic impact of climbing, and we even know some about the Red River Gorge's climbing. But we also know that the Red River Gorge climbing community has changed over the last 5 years, as has the Red itself. Things looked a little different. And so we wanted to update this study for 2020 to try to capture some of those changes. And to begin that process, we want to talk a little bit about the methodology of that study. But before I do that, I want to go back in time just a little bit. This picture you see here is none other than Mr. Ron Stokely, one of the two people, along with Dieter Britz, who recorded the earliest first ascents in the Red River Gorge. And here he is getting ready to climb at Natural Bridge, of all places. Check out that rope around his neck. That is something else. It's a really exciting story. We'll come back to that too. All right, so for the Red River Gorge 2020 study, we did an online survey. In 2015, we did an in-person survey. We had over 700 responses. For our online survey, we had over 2,300 responses. We had this online for about a year. We do treat this as a convenient sample. Couple of reasons. First off, we don't know how many people got exposed to the online survey because social media shares and so forth. But second, we don't know exactly how many unique persons there are in the Red River Gorge climbing community. So we feel it's safest to treat this as a convenient sample, but note that convenient samples are perfectly common and perfectly acceptable for economic impact studies. So we're good to go there. This particular survey included a lot of things. And by the way, thanks to all of you who completed that survey. I genuinely appreciate it. What we'll talk about of those categories today will be 13 common expenditure areas, some demographics, and some use statistics. I'll also create some future videos talking about some of the other things that we found in that report. Now, we did need to set up a study area. Remember, for an economic impact study, I need to set up a study area, I need to have some mean expenditures, and I need to have some visitation estimates. Our study area for this is going to be 5 counties known very well to Red River Gorge climbers. That is Estill, Lee, Menifee, Powell, and Wolf counties. Now, 4 of these counties have climbing in them. Lee, Menifee to a lesser degree, Powell, and certainly Wolf all have climbing in them. Lee has the Pendergrass Murray, Millard Fork, Mother Lode. We have in Wolf County, Muir Valley, and of course the Daniel Boone National Forest and the Red River Gorge Geological Area is included in the Menifee, Powell, and Wolf counties. Estill is important because many people will drive through Estill on their way into the Red River Gorge, and Powell actually for the same reasons, because these are kind of these areas that we're trying to think about where people will drive through, possibly spend money as a result of their visits on the way in and on the way out. Study areas are not just about thinking about the expenditures. We want to think about where the expenditures might occur outside that immediate activity area. That's why we include Estill in this case, and Powell, if it didn't have climbing, would also be included for this reason. I don't want to go into super deep detail about it, but we use United States Forest Service methodology to make sure that we reduce the risk of overstating estimates throughout. This includes things like excluding really large groups, getting rid of people, excluding cases, who have stayed for especially long stays. In this study, it was over a month. People who didn't climb in the Red River Gorge in the last year, persons who live inside the study area because they're not new expenditures, they already exist in the economy. And also retail expenditures that are over $500 end up getting recoded just to make sure if you went in and bought like $5,000 of climbing gear that week or a $5,000 bike, we don't count that as being a normal expenditure. We also take an extra step, something we featured in the Maples and Associates paper in the Journal of Appalachian Studies on the New River Gorge study we did, where we get rid of expenditures that are 3 deviations above the means. Basically what this does is it takes out cases that are just really, really high and removes them. It doesn't remove 0 expenditures where they claimed no expenditures. It's only on the high end. And so the good thing about this is, like in an online survey, let's say somebody meant to say they got $50 worth of McDonald's and they put in $5,000 instead because they didn't put the comma or the period in the right spot. This gets rid of that. It fixes that problem. It'll exclude those cases from the means. So it helps us, again, have a very conservative, reliable mean estimate that we can provide. So that's the basic methodology for this economic impact study. And I'm happy to go into more detail if you have questions. Likewise, we'll make the full report available for those who'd like to read it. Now, we needed a couple of things for our study. We needed a study area, we needed mean expenditures, and we need visitation estimates. Well, this starts our study area. As I mentioned, our study area includes 5 counties. That's Estill, Lee, Menifee, Powell, and Wolf. This is an area, I don't have to tell you, it's poor. It's generational poverty, as we see so much in Eastern Kentucky. The thing that sticks with me from the 2015 study is several of these counties popped up in the poorest counties in the United States. They were in the top 100. Lee was in the top 10, as I recall, or top 20, rather, sorry. Estill was in the top 100, and Wolf was in the top 20, as I recall. So these were very poor counties, and they faced generational poverty. The thing that I think of, though, with economic impact studies in climbing is that this is an activity that doesn't require a lot of changes in the economy. It doesn't require building lots of new things or new infrastructure. If we can create access to climbing areas, climbers will come, they will spend money. And more importantly, they value the local community and they value the local flavor of these areas. So they want to protect that and be part of it. So, as such, it kind of makes me feel that maybe climbing could be a beneficial economic activity for some of these poor areas, particularly transitional economies that are moving away from things like extractive industries and trying to figure out what comes next. This could work here. But to do this, we've got to get this economic impact study up. We do have our study area. Now we need some mean expenditures. And based on our survey results, we're able to do that. So this is our mean expenditures table. This talks about the mean or typical average expenditures per person per visit for climbers coming to the Red River Gorge. I won't go through every one of these categories, but they cover some really common areas like lodging, food, retail purchases, and so forth. These 13 categories from our survey. And when we total them all together, climbers spend about $75 a trip, which is a very valuable amount. It's coming in, adding into this local economy. Now, the big areas typically were in the cabin rental industry, gasoline, and a very important thing when you're driving around the Daniel Boone, and dine-in food, and that includes any place that has wait staff. So that kind of helps you understand what dine-in food is, whereas fast food would be like McDonald's. These are your big expenditures, though. These are where climbers are dropping a lot of money when they come to visit the area. One interesting thing that I've seen difference from the 2015 to the 2020 study is an increase in grocery purchases in the Red River Gorge study area. We do see that climbers are purchasing about $12 worth of groceries every time they come into the Red, and that number has gone up quite a bit from the previous studies. But there you go, $75 a trip. So we got a study area set, we got mean expenditure set, we need one last thing, and it's probably the most difficult one, and that's our visitation estimate. Now, the visitation estimate is difficult because, first off, the experts in this field, that would be the Daniel Boone National Forest and the National Forest Service, they don't count climbers. The National Visitor Use Monitoring data doesn't have anything on how many climbers are in the area. So we strike a blank there. Second problem, there's like 80-something parking options in the Red River Gorge. Some of them are really big lots, like at, Muir Valley or at Pendergrass Murray, or even near Military Wall. And then some of them are like these 1 and 2 car pull-offs at like Tower Rock. So it's hard to count all of those individually. Now, we do have the benefit that we have some good data from places like Muir Valley and from the Red River Gorge Climbers Coalition. We don't have great data from the Daniel Boone National Forest, but what we can do is try to take what we do know, that's the location of the parking lots, what's likely to be parked there in a particular month, and start to build a day-by-day data set of visitation across a typical year in the Red River Gorge. And what we do is we count cars here. We try to think about how many cars would be in a particular lot on a particular day, and we can basically adapt this across the entire year. Now, again, we have the benefit that some of the lots are really easy. We know exactly how many cars you can fit into a Muir Valley lot. And Pendergrass Murray and Miller Fork, we know exactly how many cars can fit in those areas. So what we have to do is just kind of think about the capacity of those lots over time. Now, I'm happy to talk more about this data set that we've created. It's probably the best visitation estimate that we've had to date. We ran this through a lot of focus grouping. We ran this through a lot of different partners in this to make sure everyone felt good about it. And when we counted all those cars together, we could multiply them by 1.8 climbers. That's about the average number of climbers in a car per the survey, and also what we found in the 2015 survey. And we can use that to estimate that there are about 102,000 climbing visits coming to the Red River Gorge every year. Again, this isn't a perfect estimate, but it's certainly the best estimate that's been done to date on how many climbing visits are happening in this Red River Gorge area. So I'm really excited about this. So this completes our pieces. We've now put the study area together. We've put our mean expenditures together. We got our visitation estimates. So now, are you ready for the big announcement? All right, here it comes. So when we take those numbers and we put them all together, we can now estimate that climbers in a typical year spend about $8.7 million right here in the Red River Gorge. That's up from $3.8 in 2015. That's a big increase. And there's a lot of reasons behind that. We'll talk about those in just a moment. First off, I want to talk very clearly about how we got this estimate of these expenditures. We got our visitation estimate we've talked about. We did separate out about 2% of those people as being local people. These are visits coming from people living in and around the Red River Gorge, living in the study area specifically. We also looked at the day spending. We multiplied out that $75 across each of those categories that we talked about by our visitation estimate after we've taken out the local visits to get $7.481 million there. And then we also could look at lodging. We estimated that 90% of the people stayed overnight from the survey, and also from our 2015 study, we had a similar result. We estimated 80% of those people go to camping, a lot of them at Miguel's, for example, 5% in motels, and 15% in the rental cabin industry, and that brings in another $1.17 million. Finally, we included the economic impact results from the Rocktoberfest in a typical year. We had done a previous study of that, and so we included in that estimate as during a typical year that would happen. And there you go. That's how we build up our $8.7 million estimate. Now what we have to do is take that number and put it into something called IMPLAN. Now, IMPLAN is a software, it stands for Impacts for Planning, that is used to understand how these expenditures create changes in the local economy. It goes to the very essence of what an economic impact study is trying to do. And so when we do that, we can actually get an estimate on the jobs supported by climbing expenditures, the wages in the areas supported, and so forth. And when we think about what that $8.7 million does, when we plug that into the economy, we see that climbers now support about 104 jobs in the region every year with their expenditures. And that's also about $2.6 million in wages. Now, I want to talk about that job thing because IMPLAN doesn't think of jobs as whole jobs. It actually thinks of them as portions of jobs. So that like 0.60 could be a 0.60% or be 60% of someone's job that is dedicated solely to working with climbers. You can think most people, their jobs aren't dedicated just to one clientele. They have many clientele, especially in like retail. You're not working just with climbers. You're also working with local residents, mountain biking visitors, hiking visitors, all sorts of other people. So when we say 104 jobs, this is portions of jobs, and it totals up to about 104 jobs. It's kind of how IMPLAN sees that. These can include part-time jobs, full-time jobs. These can also include business owners and more. But it creates about $2.6 million in labor income. You do see two on this table that I've listed. All of the economic impact categories, value added and output, are also included. I use labor income because it's the most conservative estimate. As we get value added into output, we start to get bigger and bigger areas, and it's just really less conservative. So I really like to use labor income, which is the number that I like to focus on. I explain these statistics a little bit more in the full report if you'd like to look at that, and I'll include a link for it. Now, when we take that money into the labor market and we start thinking about what it's doing, climber expenditures are really mostly supporting full service restaurant jobs. Full service restaurants are restaurants with waitstaff. And so any restaurant that has a waitstaff falls into this category. The opposite of that would be fast food, which would be like McDonald's, for example. But we do see that most of the jobs and portions of jobs that are being supported by climber expenditures really do fall in the restaurant industry, as well as accommodations, retail, and so forth. We do see some odd ones a little farther down, like real estate, accounting, tax preparation, physicians, things like that. These are probably things that are created as the money moves through the economy, and probably not by climbers, but by like business owners and things like that in the economy. So these are some of the kinds of jobs, though, that climber expenditures in the Red River Gorge are supporting, particularly about 61.6 portions of full-service restaurant jobs across this region. Now, they also create taxes, and that's a very valuable thing to think about. Now, this does not include tourism taxes. That's something that's just not modeled in IMPLAN. It can be in the future, but isn't at the moment. With the Red River Gorge climbing community, we see that their expenditures are supporting $451,000 in state and local taxes, and then $346,000 in federal taxes. So these are really important tax dollars that are, again, supporting growth in the community, services for local people, and more. Now, I mentioned local residents a couple times because they're not included in economic impact studies because they are not new expenditures. They already live in the study area, and so that means that they are already part of that economy and are not new expenditures. But for the first time, I really very specifically wanted to take a moment to talk and collect data from these people who live in this area and try to understand their expenditures. So we asked them some really important things about how much do you spend in a year at restaurants and retail, infrastructure. We asked about their property taxes, their mortgages, their rents, their business taxes, memberships, donations, all sorts of other things. And if we make the assumption that there's about 100 to 200 local resident climbers, which people more or less feel comfortable with that number, might be a little high, might be a little low, we don't really know for sure, but that would add another 1.3 to 2.7 million dollars in expenditures that, even though it's not economic impact, it is still linked to climbing. And I want to be very explicit that this does not include improvements of gravel, developing roads, trails, and all the amazing things that are done at all the local climbing organization properties in this region. Those are not part of this expenditure. These are just local residents counting that. So yet again, even by living here, and more climbers are choosing to live in the Red River Gorge every year, we see that those expenditures are also supporting the local economy, even though they don't count as economic impact. Now, the demographics of climbers honestly haven't changed all that much. Particularly the ones that really surprised everyone with the 2015 study was the education component. Now we see that climbers are still educated as they were in 2015. About 44% of the people taking the survey reported they had a bachelor's degree. Another 40% mentioned that they had an advanced degree. That would be a master's, PhD, Juris Doctorate, or other terminal degree. So you're a very educated bunch, and the same statistics still hold. You're well educated, and many of you are also getting some great incomes, more than me, in fact. We saw that about 1 in 4 had basically six-figure incomes, and over 60% had $50,000 or more in individual personal income. We also asked some other things. About 19% of people, about 1 in 5, bring a dog to the crag. About 19% also reported that they have a job in the outdoor recreation industry. And of those, 15% said they were business owners. We also see, too, that people started climbing started climbing indoors more than outdoors. There's long been a conversation about the Gym to Crag movement and did people start climbing indoors or outdoors. For the Red River Gorge community, it seems about half of you started climbing indoors, about 27% outdoors, and everyone else said about indoors and outdoors at about the same time. The average age for the respondent was 34, although do remember this survey could only be completed by people who are 18 years or older, so that statistic is a little bit skewed. Not sure who that 90-year-old person is, but I'm sure hopeful that you're still climbing out there. And about 35% of the people who completed the survey reported that they were female. So the demographics really haven't changed all that much since 2015. What has changed since 2015? Well, there actually has been some methodology improvement. Even though it's still a convenient sample as it was in 2015, because we didn't know the population size then either, we do have a bigger sample, and that can give us some more data points for dealing with expenditures that are disproportionately high and getting those out of there. We also included more spending categories. In fact, the big one was adding in the Airbnb industry. And I'll talk more about that in a moment, but having that category in alone really helped quite a bit. We also see, too, that we have much, much better visitation estimates. The previous visitation estimate was a close conversation with the Access Fund and the climbing community and the Danger Boom National Forest to try and figure out what worked best. I think the number was low. I think this gives us now the best clear-cut visitation estimate that we've had. On top of that, too, the 2015 study took the visitation estimate in the direction of trying to get very nuanced in how long the people were staying, and so that lost the overall picture of what climbers were spending and their visits were like as a result. And it didn't make the results, any less good or anything like that, but it just created a situation where it was really hard to extrapolate that to other places. So that's something that we've stepped away from in this study, and certainly we'll use the current approach going forward. There's also been some local changes. We have seen a change in how locals understand climbers. After the 2015 study came out, we were able to share the results with the Lee County Tourism Board and the Betaville Tourism folks. And it was a really exciting moment where local residents got to, often for the first time, meet climbers and be in the same room with them and ask them questions. And we've seen in that moment and spreading out from there, the local community being far more accepting of climbers. That education thing was a really big one too, starting to realize that climbers were very well educated and that they had high incomes, broke apart some longstanding ideas that the local community had about climbers being, dirtbags, but not in the good sense dirtbags like you would think. There's also been a massive growth of Airbnbs, so that's provided a lot more expenditure opportunities. There are a lot more local businesses. Access to alcohol has expanded. There's new counties that are now selling alcohol. We've seen expansions to existing businesses, including Miguel's, which has got an awesome new kitchen. We're seeing more climbers, and there was the addition of the Miller Fork Recreational Preserve, so that alone added a huge new chunk of climbing. There's also an increased focus in this study now we're seeing on spending inside the Red River Gorge rather than, say, stopping in Lexington. This study probably helped change some minds and make you realize that it's so important that if you're going to climb in this place and you love this place so deeply, you got to take care of it, and that includes helping the economy here. In the end, I'm excited to say that this 2020 study is a far more reliable, far more useful estimate. And even with COVID happening in 2020, I will still say that the visitation estimates shifted such that we saw more people coming in over the summer, even though it was harder to get here in the spring. We saw more people coming in late into the summer, and then the fall season, it was just very, very full. As many of you know, it was a very full season. So we still feel like this number holds true for a typical year going forward. This might be a study that if the climbing community is interested in updating it again in 5 or 10 years, I'd certainly be interested in doing that. I have some exciting news to share, and I am so absolutely proud to share this. As part of doing studies on the Red River Gorge, I started hearing these amazing climbing stories, and I started recording those climbing stories and writing them down. And then at some point I realized, let's document this whole history. So if you've ever been curious about the history of the Red River Gorge climbing community, wait no longer, because the book's coming out in September. I'm so excited with West Virginia University Press to have this book coming out, and I am truly grateful to 50 years of amazing rock climbers who made this possible. This book runs the gamut from the pre-climbing days, back when they were proposing a Red River Gorge Dam, which some of you may be surprised to hear was happening. Yeah, this whole thing could have been underwater. The book talks about the earliest climbing routes, who established them. There's actually some surprises on that, including adding in some additional cases for earliest climbing routes. If you're ever curious exactly why Military Wall closed, that little section there at the trailhead, well, we have that in there too. If you'd like to know the early history of the Red River Gorge Climbers Coalition meeting in Lexington there, it's exciting. It's an exciting story, and we've got it there in the book. If you want to hear the amazing story of the Webbers creating Mirror Valley and getting all that trash and everything out of Mirror Valley, yeah, it's in there too. So I'm really appreciative to the climbing community for being so kind to me to let me capture your stories. And I hope that you find this book as great a thank you as I could truly think of to give you. So I hope you enjoy it. It's going to be available on Amazon in September. And I'm hoping to do some more history talks on this channel, talking about the stuff in the book, and help you learn a little bit more about the history of this amazing climbing community. So thanks for tuning into this presentation today. I'll do more of these presentations in the future if you're interested in them. Appreciate if you'd like to like and subscribe to the channel. That always helps to support me. As we think going forward, the next 50 years of what happens in the Red River Gorge truly is partly in the hands of the rock climbers here. You are an important, thriving, vibrant part of this community. You are part of the Red River Gorge now. So I absolutely have to ask you to sign the Climbers Pact with the Access Fund. You've got to take care of the red. If you see people damaging this place, you've got to fix it. You got to make it good. You got to say something. If other people are leaving trash, if it's a hiker or somebody else leaving trash, you got to pick it up. You've got to take care of this place. If you take care of the red, it's going to take care of you. Above and beyond, Climbers Rock. Thank you so much for letting me and my team work with your community, and I look forward to many more years of working together. got questions about this study, or if you'd like to see the full study, I'll have it available below. And feel free to send me questions anytime. Thanks. Have a safe climbing trip, and we'll see you soon. Climbers rock.